Welcome to the Mondoweiss podcast. I'm your host, Dave Reed. At Mondoweiss, we cover the movements, activists, and policymakers who affect the struggle for freedom in Palestine. In this episode, our U.S. correspondent Michael Arria speaks to Huwaida Arraf, a Palestinian-American peace activist, human rights lawyer, and now candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives in Michigan. Arraf launched her campaign to unseat an incumbent Republican. However, at the beginning of this year, redistricting placed her in a race for an open seat. Last week, Michael asked Huwaida about growing up in Michigan, how she first became an international peace activist, and why she's now turned toward electoral politics.
So thanks for joining us. Before we get into your work as an activist, a lawyer, and now a candidate for Congress, I wanted to talk maybe a little bit about what your early life was like in Michigan as the child of Palestinian immigrants. What are your early memories of Palestine? And I'm wondering also how your activism around Palestine started.
Well, thank you for having me. So my parents came to this country when my mom was pregnant with me. My father is from a Palestinian village that falls inside of 48, and my mom is from the West Bank town of Beit Sahur. Beit Sahur is still in the West Bank, still under full military occupation, and in 48, even as citizens of Israel, we're a barely tolerated minority, so nowhere near full citizen with equal rights. So my parents, I believe, wanted something better for us and decided to come to the United States. I'm the oldest now of 5 children. When we were younger, my parents tried to take us regularly to Palestine to keep a connection with family. I think it was really traumatic for my parents to leave, but they believed that they were doing it for us to be able to have opportunity and know freedom and not live under the condition that millions of Palestinians live under. Israel's boot, unfortunately. But so we would go in the summer and we had that connection with family. I remember I loved going, but I remember my first kind of realization of what was really happening, as much as a child could expect to understand, was when I was about 5 years old. And I was super proud of being an American. I thought that was a cool thing. I was going to be the first woman president of the United States. And I, again, just thought it was a cool thing being American, and would show that off in Palestine too. And I remember one time we were in Beit Sahur and we're getting ready to go to Jerusalem to visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And I wanted my favorite aunt to come with us. And she couldn't. And so I was really upset, like, why can't you come with us? And of course, I didn't realize, how restrictive the traveling is. And even though we were only 15 minutes away, Beit Sahur from Jerusalem, like why she would not be allowed to enter Jerusalem. And then she said to me that it's, your government and your president that's supporting this, which was really a shock to me, a 5-year-old who just loved America, and here seeing that it was my country, the United States, that was somehow preventing my aunt from coming with me to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And I think that started my realization that, something isn't right. And then each time we would go back, once it was a very traumatic experience. I was about 10 and just realized how much Israeli security was searching us, separating my mom and my siblings from my dad. And we were strip searched even as I was the oldest. I was about 10. And then my siblings were younger than me. And we were still like put in a separate room and strip searched as kids. And we were held so long, the plane took off, and this kind of treatment that was just pure humiliation. And as I got even older, recognizing that not just in Palestine, but in other places, U.S. policy was not as we say it is, and as young idealistic me wanted it to be all about freedom, human rights, and democracy at home and around the world. I think that really started kind of the trajectory that my life took with becoming more active on issues of social justice. At home, in Michigan, I grew up in a very kind of homogeneous environment. There wasn't a lot of diversity. We were like one of a handful of homes in my city and in my school that were, not white. but I tried to blend in as much as possible. Proud of my culture, but at school and with friends, just wanted to be your average, American girl. And but when I got to college, opened up even more. And so without going too long, it was where I started more of my heavy duty activism. I should say my father here in Michigan was an auto worker, was with the union, worked really hard to give us the life we were able to have. We didn't have a whole lot, but his job with the union was supported our family of 7. As I said, I was oldest of 5 children, and we I'm grateful to him and to my mom for all they've done and all they've sacrificed. I mean, sometimes I wonder, just he never really talked very much about Palestine after kind of leaving, and even when I got into my activism, I think he secretly, or not even secretly, sometimes very vocally, said, just focus on your studies and your life, as opposed to doing all the things that I later started to do to advocate for Palestinian freedom and human rights.
You were involved in the founding of the International Solidarity Movement in 2001, which helped bring renewed attention to the Palestinian struggle, renewed global attention. How do you view the legacy of the ISM? And if you could just reflect on your time there, what did you learn from that work, and what lessons did you learn about fighting for Palestine within the United States?
How it came about that I co-founded the International Solidarity Movement, I had, after graduating college, decided to move to Jerusalem. I accepted a job at the time working as part of a conflict resolution program that brought, quote unquote, both sides together. And that's always hailed as such a great thing. And dialogue is never a bad thing. These kinds of programs that people participate in and then feel good that they're doing something, and it tends to, they get a view that this is all about just learning to get along, as opposed to tackling the root cause of what causes the extreme suffering of Palestinians, or in any such conflict where you absolutely don't have parity. In this case, obviously, you have one of the strongest militaries in the world that is not only just occupying Palestinian territory, land, and lives, but that is intent on getting as much Palestinian land as possible with as little Palestinians on it as possible. So it's very much a colonization project. And as part of that, you have an occupation, which is killing and destroying Palestinian lives from inside and out. So it is, but I went initially to work for this conflict resolution program. I realized very quickly that not only is it very limited and not working, but that it can have actually a very negative effect on the struggle for Palestinian freedom, because, like I said, it gives people this idea that they're doing good, but you're not actually focusing on dismantling any structures of oppression. So the second Palestinian Intifada broke out while I was living in Palestine. At first, I joined a lot of these Palestinian protests, men, women, and children taking to the streets protesting Israel's oppressive policies, and we were responded to with lethal Israeli violence. And here is a powerful military up against unarmed civilians that are just rising up and demonstrating us, sometimes throwing rocks or sometimes throwing shoes, but not armed, right? And yet you have soldiers shooting at us. You have armored personnel carriers. You have tanks. You have bulldozers. The Intifada became more armed on the Palestinian side after a few weeks of these unarmed uprisings, where Israel killed 127 protesters, shot dead mainly from the bullet wounds to the head and chest area. So it was very much a shoot to kill policy on Israel's part. A lot of these demonstrations, the people that I demonstrated with, that I said, they died down, and those that had guns in Palestinian society were trying to use them to fight a very a situation that you can't really win with some old dilapidated, rifles up against, again, one of the most powerful militaries in the world. But it was a feeling that we have to do something. But this only gave Israel an excuse to kind of then bring in their attack helicopters and fighter jets and roll their tanks into cities and towns, an excuse to kill more. And on the global scale, not only was nobody doing anything about the massive loss of Palestinian life, but Palestinians were being blamed for their own death, because why did Palestinians walk away from a peace process? And the peace process, of course, as they're talking about, Oslo, 1993 to 2000, that only served to entrench Israel's hold on our land. They expanded their settlements. They accelerated the rate of home demolition and the stealing of land, and called it a peace process. And whenever Palestinians complained about it, we were just to be patient because we were in a peace process. So when the Intifada broke out, it was a sense of Palestinians saying, we're not going to be part of this facade anymore of a peace process. We want our freedom. And as I said, Israel came at us with, like I said, shoot to kill policies, and nobody was doing anything about it. And so the idea of the international solidarity movement was getting people around the world to come see what's happening in Palestine, come see with your own eyes what's happening when our governments, when people are silent, and it's happening in many cases, especially as it concerns Americans, with American tax dollars. And with the idea of getting people from all around the world to come to Palestine, maybe if internationals marched with Palestinians, then Israel would use less lethal forms of violence against people. Maybe the internationals could help change the way the mainstream media was reporting on things. Always, it's the Israeli narrative. Always, Israel is the victim. And even if the mainstream media wasn't going to change the way they were reporting, people around the world, they come to Palestine, but then they go back home, right? They have their own way of spreading the word about what's really happening. And also they would give Palestinians a sense of hope that they weren't abandoned. All of these things were ideas of what something like the International Solidarity Movement could do. And with that, we started inviting people to come. And now it's about 20 years later, and it's been phenomenal. We've had our ups and downs, but in terms of the thousands and thousands of people that have come, it's been really kind of heartwarming. And I think it's had a tremendous effect on where solidarity with Palestinians is right now globally. Of course, we also lost a number of colleagues. As I mentioned earlier, we thought Israel would use less lethal forms of violence when internationals were involved, but we did have internationals that were seriously injured. We had internationals that were killed. Of course, this is alongside the thousands and thousands of Palestinians that have been killed. And for none of them has Israel been held accountable, and that still remains the case. So we've come a long way in terms of Palestinian advocating for Palestinian freedom, but it's still the case that Israel seems to operate with a level of impunity that still has to be broken.
You were part of the international effort to sail a flotilla of ships through the Israeli blockade of Gaza in 2010. They were carrying people and humanitarian supplies. Those ships were, of course, attacked at sea by Israeli forces, including the one you were on. People killed. You were physically assaulted by Israeli soldiers. 9 people ultimately died. I'm curious about what you learned from that experience, and what should, now that we're over a decade removed, what should people understand about what happened when they look back?
Yes, the flotilla in 2010, it was a culmination of efforts. Before that, we had sailed boats to Gaza, and the idea was not necessarily to just carry humanitarian aid to Gaza. In fact, our very first ships that sailed in the summer of 2008, they were old converted fishing boats, carried a maximum of 44 people. We didn't have much room to carry cargo, but the idea was that we were going to stand up to a deadly and illegal Israeli policy that was choking off people of Gaza. And through that, with that action, we wanted to show that Israel's policy had nothing to do with security, because they imposed this hermetic closure on Gaza. People can't get in and out. Goods can't get in and out unless it's through Israel. And there's so many things that they restrict, basically making people's lives miserable. The level of poverty, the level of unemployment, the level of destruction that Israel has wrought on Gaza is almost unimaginable. And they tell the world that it's all related to security. We wanted to expose that. This has nothing to do with security. Here are 44 peace activists from Europe and the United States sailing to Gaza on fishing boats. We don't pose a security threat. And we hope through that action, we would expose Israel's policy as not being about security, and also shake people into action. Because Israel's policy, not only is it not about security, but it's specifically designed to persecute the people, to bring them to their knees, to exact political concessions. This is not only immoral, but it is illegal under international law, and nobody, again, is making Israel change its policies. So we managed to sail a few boats that did get into Gaza because Israel decided not to confront us at sea. But at one point, then they started stopping us. They hit our boats. They almost capsized one of our boats. And that was the moment we decided that, either we stop sailing or we escalate our efforts. And we did not want to give in to this notion that their aggression and military might was stronger than the rights that we were fighting for. And so we decided to escalate and started putting together a flotilla, which came together in May of 2010. 700 people from over 35 countries. We had 7 ships. And as you said, we did 7 ships and cargo ships. And so we could load those with humanitarian supplies that Israel was not allowing into Gaza, including things like wheelchairs. I mean, Israel would let in some wheelchairs, but then would not allow the batteries to the wheelchairs to enter. Just ridiculous restrictions that were punitive and designed to make people suffer. And Israel did attack those boats, killed 10 of our colleagues, one of them being an American citizen, a young 19-year-old. He wanted to go to medical school, Furqan Dugan. And the United Nations investigation found that Furqan and 5 others that were killed, they were most likely executed. Furqan was shot with 5 bullets at close range, the last one, or at least one of the 5, to his face. This, again, most likely an execution. And the most shameful thing about that is in the United Nations Human Rights Council, the U.S. was the only country that had a citizen murdered on that flotilla, was the only country to vote against adoption of the UN report. So what did we learn from that action? I mean, it was as tragic as the outcome. People did not want to, again, cower away or give in to Israel's violence. And so the following year, more people joined another attempt at a flotilla. And so the power of just people and civilians acting together, not only is it a very powerful thing, but it's a very necessary thing, because when civilians aren't paying attention, our government in our name are doing horrible things that are, again, I remember that little girl me who thought that America was the greatest, doing things to fight for good around the world. Well, it's not always that case. We want it to be, right? But we have to be a lot more involved if we're going to make it that. And so, again, as tragic as the outcome and the loss of our colleagues was, I still think it was a very powerful action. I think actions like that continue to be necessary, and we need to continue raising our voices. Unfortunately, Gaza is still closed off. People are still suffering. So maybe it's not a boat next time, but we have to continue taking drastic action like this.
After working inside social justice movements for many years, you completed your law degree. Is that something you always planned to do, or did it just kind of grow out of your activism work?
At some point, I knew I liked the law. I didn't think I would go into human rights law. That was after seeing a lot of things that I saw working in Palestine. We were protesting against the injustices, trying to organize, but I did want to learn about what the law can do for victims of human rights abuses. I mean, what mechanisms are available to hold human rights abusers accountable, and what remedies could be found for victims of such grave injustices and human rights abuses. So I ended up studying international human rights and humanitarian law. And I guess to sum up what I found, I taught 1 year at a Palestinian law school. It was at the El-Quds University Human Rights Law Clinic, and we were teaching international human rights and humanitarian law. And one of my students says to me, this is nice, miss, like all the laws, this is all nice, but it doesn't apply to us. And of course, what she meant is all the laws on the books look great, but who is enforcing? Who is implementing when it comes to Palestinian rights? And of course, that's what victims see, is that the law only works for the powerful. And that's also what we see, here in the United States too. It's not surely in the international arena. We always say you can have good laws, but then it comes down to political will when if you want enforcement. And so it's always the little guy that has the law enforced against them, those countries. But the big and the powerful countries, they can almost get away with doing anything. And that is where it comes back to us in creating this political will. That's why I know that the law is not enough. And that's when I said it applies here in the United States too, is one of the reasons that I was motivated to run for Congress.
You're now a candidate in Congress, running for Congress in Michigan. What led you to jump into the electoral arena at this point in your life?
So in the U.S., where I am living now and raising my kids, I was working as a civil rights attorney in Detroit, and I studied international human rights. It's a different body of law, civil rights, but the principle and the passion for fighting for people's rights is the same. I had to resign from my job with COVID because having to homeschool or do that with my kids, I just couldn't give time for my clients to do a decent job for them. So I resigned. And when it came time to think about or being able to go back to work, I thought there must be something more I could do. I mean, you're looking at the laws in the United States, and laws are being made to take us backwards instead of forwards when it comes to protecting people's rights and civil rights. And I thought, I could go back to the law firm, I could go back to the courtroom, but if the law is bad, then I'm not going to be able to do much for my clients to protect their civil rights, right? So I was also politically active, and then when I looked at who was I knew who was representing me, but the fact that she was in the thumb area of Michigan where I thought I would be running, the representative that we have there has consistently voted against every single piece of legislation that could help working families in Michigan, that could help constituents of her district, constantly voting for the interests of big money. And no matter how many letters I sent or phone calls or meetings, you request with the office, the big politics and money. And she is also a Republican. I thought, we have to also step it up, that we have better people representing us in Congress, people actually that representatives that care about people. Where I live, that the thumb area of Michigan has been consistently voting like overwhelmingly Republican. And I thought that it's not because we don't agree or we can't see eye to eye on policies that will benefit all people of Michigan and working class people and people in rural communities like the thumb area of Michigan is. But what is wrong is that politicians have not been talking to people. People are angry at both sides, but certainly the anger that Donald Trump capitalized on was I was understanding. I mean, I grew up in a working class family. I am a mom now. I understand these struggles, and I am running as a Democrat, but I know that the Democratic Party has also angered a lot of people, abandoned a lot of people. We seem to always talk to just our supporters and talk down at them and not really address some of the issues that have troubled people's lives and that have made them angry. And so Donald Trump comes in and is able to capitalize on that anger. And even before, right, Donald Trump, people turning away from Democratic Party because of what the Democratic Party has become, not really what historically it has been, the party of the working class. And I wanted to run a kind of campaign and believed I could run the kind of campaign that would change that. Because when you talk to people one-on-one with their struggles, it doesn't matter. You don't have to come in and say, I'm a Republican or a Democrat. You talk about what we need and what we want as a community. We want to be able to have dignified jobs that pay a living wage. We want to be able to know that we're sending our kids to safe schools, that they're drinking safe water, that our communities are safe, that we're able to afford health care. But when you go in and talk just party politics and put on these labels, and people get in their corners, and I wanted to kind of help break through that. So I decided I'm going to challenge Lisa McClain, who was my congresswoman. But what happened is that Michigan, in the redistricting that was done, it was a good thing that Michigan, for the first time ever, had an independent citizen redistricting commission. And just right before the new year, they voted on new maps and they drew me out of the thumb area where I thought I would be running. And now I am running in a toss-up seat. It's a newly created kind of toss-up seat with no sitting incumbent. So it's a lot better for me in terms of the likelihood of winning, because it's no longer overwhelmingly Republican. It is a true toss-up seat. I'm a little bit disappointed that I won't be running in the area that I really wanted to address, but I'm committed to running the same kind of campaign where it's still going out and talking to every single person and trying to break through these issues and this method of addressing the political issues that just polarize people. So that, I mean, I went into maybe more than you asked, but to sum it up, it is this desire to do better for the people, for my neighbors, for the country, in terms of guaranteeing basic people rights. You know, I saw, why did I get into what I got into in Palestine, the kind of work I did? Because I saw egregious human rights abuses all around me, and I needed to do something about it. And here too, in Macomb, Michigan, I see egregious abuses all around me also. It's not the same as what's happening in Palestine, for sure, but people are being denied the right to adequate health care, the right to have the right to work with dignity, the right really to be free, to lead a life where you can give your kids opportunity. Also, the very reasons that my parents came to this country. And I wanted to be able to do something to change that. I need to be able to do something to change that. Those that work in the law and on the streets, I'm still going to be doing that. But obviously, we also need to be able to elect representatives into office that care about the people and that care about rights. And so that's why I took that leap. I thought it was going to be a really a tough campaign, but one that I was going to fight hard for and win. It's still, I'm not saying it's not going to be tough now, but the odds of winning and the positioning of our campaign now is a lot better. It's very exciting. And I hope that people that learn about the campaign get in touch and jump on, because this is going to be a very exciting campaign, where someone, not only like me, that is progressive on domestic issues, but someone that has my history in being unapologetically vocal on Palestinian human rights, can not only run for a high office like this, but that can also win. Is I hope will, I think, change people's minds about what it takes to run for office and who can and can't run for office.
Connected to that redistricting, obviously, like as you said, huge news also impacts, Rashida Tlaib's re-election campaign. You mentioned you're running in a completely open seat with no incumbent. Does the campaign anticipate any Democratic challengers?
We do. I can't imagine that nobody else is going to jump in, but I launched my campaign in mid-November thinking I was for sure going to run in the thumb, so was preparing for that, right? And started reaching out and doing all the assembling a really good team. I have a great campaign team and fundraising. And so I am really ahead of anyone that is going to jump in now, but I anticipate maybe 2 or 3 more people jumping in. But my goal is to just keep, making the connections, talking to people, and raising money so that the campaign remains in a really good position, stays ahead. We stay like kind of the front runners, and also kind of critically, I am going to be attacked. I've already, from the second I announced my campaign, I was attacked by people who specifically don't like what the work that I've done on Palestinian human rights. And actually, just a few days ago, there was another attack article in Breitbart News. So those attacks are going to come. What's important to me in my campaign is that we ensure we have the resources and support so that our message, our vision, what we're fighting for, the kind of policies and principles that we want to bring to Washington that centers people's civil and human rights domestically and also internationally, like that voice and that vision of human rights for all is what is amplified, is louder than the hate they're going to put out. And we've been able to do that so far, but we have a lot more work to do. And I know that a lot more attacks are going to come our way, but we're fired up.
And finally, just one more question. The last 2 months have been kind of grim here in the United States. A lot of people kind of envisioning the Democrats are heading into a sticky situation, to say the least, during the midterms. What, we have a pandemic raging. When you go around your community and talk to voters, what are the things that they're identifying as important when they head to the ballot box?
What I am seeing so far or hearing so far is a lot of the things that Democrats have been talking about, right? It is the economy is first and foremost, but to be able to, ensure that our economy continues to thrive, we have to make sure that people are safe, healthy, and thriving. So yes, we have to get the pandemic under control, and it is really unfortunate that has become such a political issue when we're talking about people's health and safety. But it is the economy. It is community safety in Michigan specifically. We recently had a horrific school shooting. And that also, even just gun safety, the people that try to polarize these issues and politicize issues that should not be politicized is devastating. In terms of what you start off saying, the midterm elections and what we might see at the polls, I think it's important for us to keep in mind. We hear a lot that, okay, if Biden isn't able to get certain things passed, like the Voting Rights Act, it's obviously critical, and it's this Build Back Better plan, then Democrats might not do so well at the polls. I think it is really important for us to keep to talk about the being able to pass these important pieces of legislation that can affect people's lives, but being able to pass them by having people in Congress that care about improving people's lives. So if people suddenly, don't go out to vote because they are disappointed, then what's going to happen is that we are going to get more obstructionists in Congress, more people that tailor to big corporate interests and big money, and not centralizing and prioritizing people. So I realize that we might have a tough challenge in terms of where we are politically right now. We have to keep fighting, and I think more than ever, people have to know, even if we're disappointed. If we let that disappointment turn into a lack of action, then things are going to get a lot worse. And I say that here, and it relates also to Palestine, right? I mean, the situation there is so bad, but if we give up, then it's certainly not going to get any better. So just like, let's not, of course there are ups and downs, of course we're human and we get disappointed, but let's also find a way to support each other and pick each other up and know that we have to keep going to make things better for ourselves, for people around us, and hopefully for future generations that we are going to leave this world to.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us today. It's been great.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to our show, a production of mondoweiss.net. The music is from Sound of Picture. Visit our site to sign up for free daily and weekly newsletters on Palestine, Israel, and related U.S. politics. If you're enjoying our podcast, please consider becoming a donor by visiting mondoweiss.net/donate. Mondoweiss is a nonprofit publication, and every donation of any amount helps sustain our work. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave a rating and review to help other listeners find our show.